So before I put the carburetors back on the bike, I wanted to look into one more thing that's been giving me a little bit of pause. And I shot the beginning part of that video because it's very hard to see them on the camera. But there's three tiny little holes, and we're looking at the outlet of the carburetor going into the engine from this direction. But there's three tiny little holes that when you open up the throttle, they're shown. Half of them are blocked when it's sitting there at idle, and as you open it up, the other two you could start to see them. And I started to wonder what in the world were those things. So sitting right here, I knew what this little pin was. This is that idle mixture screw. That's the one that I was messing with that was, when I got these, was set at 3.5 out, which stock was supposed to be 1 7/8. So that's set to 1 7/8 now, but that's actually on the exact same circuit as those three little holes. And what those little holes are called progression holes. So I found this really nice diagram. This isn't a motorcycle carburetor, but it makes sense all the same. This nice animation and diagram, and the guys had a really good write-up about it. This Professor Eduardo J. Stefanelli. I didn't look up if he's actually a professor, but maybe he is. And he has a really nice article about this. But basically, those progression holes fill a role when the carburetor is going from an idle to actually getting a load on it. So inside of the carb, when we're at idle, the only fuel that's coming in is through that idle mixture screw. And there's a tiny little bit of air coming around from where the butterfly doesn't seat. That's it. There's very little. When we open it up to wide open throttle, that's where we can see that we have the needle valve, and that's where our main jet comes in. And when we, let me do this with, I won't speak during this part, I'll show you the action. Okay. As the needle jet starts to move up, as we open the throttle more, then we start to get the fuel from the main jet. But that doesn't really kick in until like 20% throttle at least. So during this action, there's a void left where it may not be getting enough fuel. And that's where these progression holes come in. So how these progression holes work is that, let's see here. As the throttle, stop it. As the throttle opens up, sorry, let me get my bearings. All right, I'll just point this out. Here's your main jet. Okay, this is the intake right here. This is the outlet. So the outlet, we're looking at it right here. This is the throttle butterfly. Right here is where we have that little pin that we'd set to 1 7/8 turns out, and this is what I thought was supplying all of the fuel for the idle, but that's not true. There's these tiny little progression holes that as you open the throttle a little bit, these start to dump fuel into the fuel air mixture as well, because if you just open this throttle up, it's going to let a ton of air before this main jet ever has a chance to put anything in, because that diaphragm and the needle on it aren't going to pull up quick enough. So as these are uncovered, this starts to dump a little bit more fuel in. And so this works on a difference of pressure. So just like this, this is going to, as you open this throttle valve, or the throttle butterfly, and air starts to move past, it's going to create a low pressure zone right here. And this circuit is connected on this blue area, at least on these carburetors here. It's connected to these blue area here, which is going to be at the top, which is going to be more ambient pressure. So this is going to be lower than this. So as you open this throttle plate up, it's also going to dump fuel from these progression holes as you uncover them, in addition to this idle jet right here. And by the time you get, say the throttle is like this is closed, as you open a little bit, these two are going to start to dump a little, and on the GSF there's 3 progression holes. these are going to start to dump a little bit of fuel. As you get to about here, the main jet's going to be fully kicked in, and this is going to be delivering basically all of your fuel air mixture. But that little bit from here to here, this isn't enough to take care of all of it. You need some more fuel coming into the mixture, and that's where these progression holes are coming in. So I got to look into, well, these carburetors have been professionally cleaned, and I've cleaned them as well. I don't know how to actually test to see that, you know, those blockages aren't, those passages aren't blocked. I'm pretty sure that they're not by this point. I've blown air through them, and I know that these have been ultrasonically cleaned not long ago, but maybe they do have something in them. But I think this is actually worth pointing out because I'd never heard of these. So this kind of fills what the role of, in some carburetors you see a mid-jet. This would be, in my understanding, filling that same role of the mid-jet.